You ever have one of those moments where your entire life shatters in an instant? 1 second, you think you have it all: stability, love, family. And then, with just a few words, everything you believed in turns to dust. For me, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday night. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted but relieved to be back in the comfort of my own space. Sophie, my wife, was in the kitchen, humming softly as she scrolled through her phone. Everything seemed normal, familiar, and then my phone buzzed. At first, I didn't think much of it. A notification, just like any other. But when I picked it up, I saw a message from an unknown number. "You deserve to know the truth. Check Sophie's messages with Marcus." My stomach twisted. Marcus, my brother. I felt ridiculous for even hesitating. Sophie wasn't that kind of person. We had been through so much together. And Marcus? Well, he had never been a saint, but he wouldn't cross that line, right? But the seed of doubt had already been planted. Casually, I walked into the kitchen, forcing a smile. "Hey, mind if I use your phone? Mine's acting up." She glanced up, startled. Just for a second. A fraction of hesitation, so small that I almost missed it. Then she laughed, brushing it off. "Sure, but it's just a text from work. Nothing exciting." She handed me the phone, and that's when my world ended. The messages were right there, laid out like a sick joke. Flirty texts. Late-night rendezvous. Lies upon lies upon lies. Then I saw it. The one message that made my vision blur. "Marcus. Does he suspect anything?" "Sophie, I don't think so. He's too trusting, too trusting." I stood there, phone in hand, feeling like a complete idiot. How long had this been going on? How many times had I kissed her, held her, shared a life with her, while she was sneaking around with my own brother? A chair scraped against the floor as Sophie stood up. "Ethan," she said cautiously. I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't recognize the woman in front of me. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. My fingers gripped the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The words on the screen blurred, but they were already burned into my brain. Too trusting. Two simple words. Yet they carried the weight of an entire world collapsing around me. Sophie took a cautious step forward, her expression shifting from concern to something else, something almost calculated. "Ethan, what's wrong?" I finally looked at her. "How long?" She blinked. "What?" My voice came out eerily calm, but inside, a storm was brewing. "How long have you been sleeping with my brother?" A flicker of panic crossed her face before she masked it with forced confusion. "Ethan, that's crazy. Where is this coming from?" I held up the phone. The damning evidence glowed between us like a spotlight in the dark. Her breath hitched. And in that moment, I knew. She could have denied it. Could have screamed, cried, pretended I was being paranoid. Instead, she exhaled shakily, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her own lies. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry. Sorry for betraying me. Sorry for getting caught. Sorry that the life we built together had just gone up in flames." "Tell me the truth," I said, my voice lower now, rough with barely contained rage. "How long?" Her lower lip trembled. 6 months. 6 months. A bitter laugh escaped me. Half a year. Half a year of stolen moments, secret rendezvous, whispered conversations behind my back. I thought betrayal would feel like a knife to the gut. Instead, it felt like drowning. Like the air had been sucked from the room, leaving me weightless and hollow. And then, the final blow. I inhaled deeply, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. "And the baby?" Her face crumpled. That was all the answer I needed. I let go of the counter, taking a step back, suddenly needing as much distance as possible from the woman I had once loved. "You're carrying his child," I said, more to myself than to her. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. Tears streamed down Sophie's face now. "Ethan, please." But I didn't want to hear it. I turned and walked toward the door, my legs moving on autopilot. Behind me, Sophie's voice cracked as she called my name. "Ethan, don't do this. We can fix this." I didn't stop. I didn't even look back, because there was nothing left to fix. The story isn't over yet. If you discovered a betrayal like this from someone you trust, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Reddit True Vault for more incredible stories. Growing up, I learned one fundamental truth. I didn't have a brother. I had a tormentor. Marcus wasn't just my sibling. He was my living nightmare, a shadow that loomed over every aspect of my life, making sure I never felt safe, never felt wanted. It started early. I was 6 when I first realized that my parents saw Marcus differently. He could do no wrong in their eyes. If he broke something, I was blamed. If he threw a tantrum, I was the one told to be more understanding. When he got bad grades, they encouraged him. When I got good ones, they shrugged, as if it was expected. By the time I was 8, Marcus had already learned that he could get away with anything. He started with small things, hiding my toys, ripping up my drawings, whispering mean things to me when no one was listening. I told my mother once, desperate for her to stop him. She sighed. patted my head, and said, "Ethan, you're the big brother. Be patient with him." Patience. That was what they always told me to have. Be patient when Marcus threw my backpack into the mud. Be patient when he knocked over my glass of milk at dinner, just to watch me get scolded for making a mess. When I turned 10, Marcus's games became more than just childish pranks. That was the year he locked me in a dark storage closet for the first time. It had started as a normal afternoon. I was in my room, quietly reading, when Marcus barged in. "Let's play a game," he said, grinning. I should have known better. I should have said no. But I was desperate for him to like me, for him to see me as more than just a target. He led me to the storage closet near the basement. "Get inside," he said. "It'll be fun. Like hide and seek." The moment I stepped in, the door slammed shut behind me. It was pitch black. I pounded on the door, screaming for him to let me out. I could hear his laughter on the other side, muffled but clear. I kicked, I clawed, but the door wouldn't budge. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I was gasping for breath, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. When our parents came home and found me, I thought they would punish Marcus. Instead, they told me I was being dramatic. "Boys will be boys," my mother said. That was the day I stopped expecting them to protect me. At 12, Marcus's bullying took a new turn. He started getting physical. A shove here, a trip there. He knocked the books out of my hands at school, laughed when other kids joined in. He called me weak, a loser, a nerd. I tried to avoid him. I tried to stay out of his way. But Marcus didn't need a reason to go after me. He just did. One afternoon, I was walking home from school when he and his friends surrounded me. "Let's see if you can run faster than last time," Marcus taunted, shoving me forward. I ran, but they caught up. They always did. That day, I came home with bruises on my arms and a bloody lip. My mother gasped when she saw me, but before I could even speak, Marcus jumped in. "Ethan started it," he said. "He was being a jerk to my friends." Mom didn't even ask what happened. She just sighed, shaking her head at me. "You need to stop causing trouble, Ethan." That was when I knew. No matter what Marcus did, he would always be the golden child. The worst moment came when I was 15. Our parents were out, and Marcus found me in the kitchen, making a sandwich. He didn't like that I had the last piece of ham. "Give it to me," he said. I refused. His expression darkened. Before I could react, he shoved me hard against the counter. Then, with a twisted grin, he grabbed a pillow from the couch, pinned me down, and pressed it over my face. I fought. I kicked, clawed at his arms, tried to scream. But the pillow muffled everything. My chest burned. My vision started to blur. And then, he let go. I rolled onto my side, gasping, my entire body shaking. Marcus just laughed. "Relax, it was just a joke." A joke. That's what he called it. That was the moment I realized he would never stop. And that was the moment I decided to fight back. I found a local gym and signed up for self-defense classes. At first, I was awful. I was scrawny, uncoordinated, and I hated the idea of hurting anyone. But I kept going. I trained every night, pouring all my anger, all my helplessness, into every punch, every kick. The next time Marcus tried to shove me, I didn't run. I didn't cower. I hit him back. He hadn't expected it. He stumbled, blinking in shock, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. He ran to our mother, of course, told her I attacked him for no reason. She didn't even ask what had happened. She just looked at me with disappointment. "You're older, Ethan. You should be setting a better example." A better example? Of what? Letting him treat me like dirt forever? I stopped caring about what they thought that day. Marcus changed tactics after that. He stopped hitting me, but he turned to manipulation. He would tell my parents lies about me, how I was mean to him, how I ignored him. If I did well in school, he would spread rumors that I had cheated, and they believed him. No matter what I did, I was always the villain. I realized the only way to win was to leave. I worked harder than I ever had before. I poured everything into my studies, knowing that a scholarship was my only ticket out, and I did it. The day my acceptance letter came was the happiest day of my life. Dad drove me to my dorm. Even Mom seemed proud. But Marcus? He barely acknowledged I was leaving. That should have been the end of it. I should have been free. But Marcus wasn't done with me yet, because no matter how far I ran, he always found a way to drag me back into his games. After leaving home, I thought I had finally escaped Marcus's shadow. For the first time in my life, I was free. Free to make my own choices, to live without fear, to become someone other than Marcus's little brother. The weight that had pressed on my chest for years had finally lifted, and I could breathe. University was everything I had hoped for and more. I threw myself into my studies, determined to prove, to myself, to the world, that I could succeed without anyone's help. I spent late nights in the library, took extra courses, and worked part-time to support myself. It was exhausting, but every sleepless night felt worth it. I was carving out a future that was mine alone. Then I met Sophie. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room and instantly make everyone feel like they belonged. Warm, intelligent, effortlessly charming. Everything Marcus had pretended to be but never was. She had this way of making people feel special, like they were the only person in the world when she was talking to them. We met in a literature class, bonding over our shared love for classic novels. I was always more comfortable with books than people, but with Sophie, it was different. She saw things in stories that I had never noticed before, her insights making me view the world through a new lens. At first, I convinced myself that we were just friends, but the more time we spent together, the more I found myself wanting to be near her. She was different from anyone I had ever known. She listened when I spoke, really listened, not just waiting for her turn to talk. She laughed at my jokes, even the ones that no one else found funny. She saw me, not as an afterthought, not as Marcus's brother, but as Ethan. Just Ethan. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. What started as late-night study sessions turned into coffee dates, which turned into long walks around campus, which turned into stolen kisses under flickering streetlights. It was the kind of love that felt easy, natural, like it had always been meant to happen. By the time we graduated, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. We moved to a small city in England, where I had secured a job at a publishing house. Sophie worked as a freelance editor, taking on projects she was passionate about. Our days were filled with quiet mornings, drinking coffee as we read side by side, and evenings spent cooking together, laughing as we made a mess of the kitchen. Life was simple, peaceful. For the first time, I felt safe. Then Marcus found me. It started with an email. "Hey, little bro, long time no see." I stared at the screen, my hands clenching into fists. After years of silence, he had found me again. My heart pounded in my chest as I debated whether to reply. Sophie noticed my expression. "Ethan? What's wrong?" I hesitated. "It's my brother." She knew about Marcus. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know that I didn't want him in my life. She frowned. "What does he want?" "I don't know." I deleted the email without responding, but Marcus didn't give up. A week later, he showed up at our doorstep. He looked different. Older, but still carrying that same smug confidence, as if he owned the world. "Ethan," he said, grinning, "aren't you going to invite me in?" I wanted to slam the door in his face. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to shut him out, to protect the life I had built. But Sophie, ever the peacemaker, placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Maybe we should hear him out," she whispered. Against my better judgment, I let him in. Marcus spun a story about how he had changed, how he had grown up, realized his mistakes, wanted to make amends. He said he was working a steady job now, trying to be a better person. I didn't believe a word of it, but Sophie did. She encouraged me to give him a chance, to try and rebuild our relationship. "He's your brother, Ethan," she said. "Maybe he really does want to fix things." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that Marcus didn't change, that he never would. But a small part of me, the part that had once been a little boy, desperate for his older brother's approval, wanted to believe her. So I let Marcus back in. At first, things seemed fine. He visited occasionally, stayed for dinner, asked about our lives. Sophie was thrilled, convinced that he was truly making an effort. But I knew better. I saw the way he looked at her, the way his charm turned up a notch whenever she was around, the way he found excuses to touch her. An innocent brush of the hand, a playful nudge, a lingering hug. I told myself I was imagining it. Then the little things started. Sophie would come home late, saying she had been out with a friend. But she seemed distant, distracted. Her phone buzzed more often, and when I asked who it was, she hesitated before answering. One evening, as I set the table for dinner, she received a message and turned away from me to read it. "Who's that?" I asked casually. She locked her screen quickly. Just a friend. I tried to believe her. But that small voice in the back of my head, the one that had been conditioned by years of Marcus's manipulation, wouldn't go away. One night, I woke up to find her missing from bed. My heart pounded as I got up, searching the apartment. I found her in the living room, sitting on the couch, phone in hand, the glow of the screen illuminating her face in the darkness. She didn't hear me approach. "Sophie," she jumped, quickly locking her screen. "Ethan, you scared me. Who were you talking to?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Just a friend." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be the kind of person who could trust without hesitation. But deep down, something told me the past was repeating itself. And this time, I wasn't sure I could survive it. For weeks, the doubt gnawed at me like a parasite burrowing deep into my mind, whispering insecurities I tried to ignore. But the signs were there, glaring, undeniable. Sophie had changed. It started subtly, like a shift in the wind before a storm. She began coming home later than usual, her reasons vague, her words careful. "Work ran late," she'd say. But she worked from home. "I was out with friends," she'd insist. But there was never any proof. No selfies, no texts from her so-called friends, just empty words floating in the air between us. Then came the phone calls. At first, I barely noticed. A hushed voice in the other room, a quick end to a conversation when I walked in. But then the pattern emerged. It wasn't just random calls. It was a ritual. A glance over her shoulder, a step away from me, fingers clutching the phone just a little too tightly. I convinced myself it was nothing, until Marcus became a regular presence in our home. It started with occasional visits, a friendly dinner, a casual drop-in. But soon, he was there more often than not. Charming, laughing, slipping into our lives like he had never left. At first, it seemed harmless. He would share stories from our childhood, embellishing them to make himself look better. Sophie laughed at his jokes, even when they were at my expense. Something about it didn't sit right. I knew Marcus. I knew how he worked, how he twisted reality to suit himself. But I ignored my instincts, because if I acknowledged them, if I admitted that something was wrong, I'd have to face the truth. And I wasn't ready for that. One evening, Sophie left her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered. It was a rare moment. She never left it unattended anymore. The screen lit up, vibrating once. Then again. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't the type to invade someone's privacy. I believed in trust, in respect, in boundaries. But trust required honesty. And honesty was something Sophie no longer gave me. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone. The message preview flashed on the screen. "Marcus, can't stop thinking about last night." The air in my lungs turned to stone. I hesitated. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe there was an innocent explanation, but my gut told me otherwise. With a deep breath, I unlocked her phone. Her passcode, a number she had once shared with me in laughter, now felt like a cruel joke. And there it was, a thread of messages stretching back months, flirting, secrets, lies. Then, the worst one. "Marcus, does he suspect anything?" "Sophie, I don't think so. He's too trusting." I felt sick. The walls of our home, the life I had built with her, suddenly felt like an illusion. A carefully constructed facade that had just crumbled into dust. I heard the shower turn off. Footsteps approached. I forced myself to put the phone back, wiping my palms against my jeans, trying to calm my racing heart. Sophie entered the kitchen, her hair damp, her skin flushed from the heat of the water. She smiled at me, like nothing had changed, like she hadn't just shattered my world. "Hey," she said softly, wrapping her arms around me. Her warmth, once comforting, now felt suffocating. I stiffened under her touch. "Who were you texting?" My voice came out eerily calm. Sophie froze. Just for a second. Just long enough. "What?" I pulled away, my eyes locking onto hers. "Your phone was buzzing." I saw the name. Her breath hitched. A flicker of panic crossed her face before she masked it with a smile. "Oh, just Marcus." He was checking in, like a concerned brother, not the man she had been sneaking around with behind my back. I inhaled sharply. "Sophie, don't lie to me." She swallowed hard. "Ethan, just tell me the truth." My voice cracked. Silence. Then, finally, "I'm sorry." 2 words. That was all it took to destroy me. I had held onto a sliver of hope. A desperate, foolish belief that I was wrong. That there was an explanation, but there wasn't. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't even trying to. I let out a hollow laugh, stepping away. How long? Sophie's lower lip trembled. Ethan, how long? A tear slid down her cheek. 6 months, 6 months, half a year. I had been sleeping next to her, loving her, trusting her, while she had been sneaking around with him. My stomach churned. The bile rose in my throat. I turned away, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. And the baby? My voice was barely a whisper. Behind me, she let out a strangled sob. That was all the answer I needed. A bitter laugh escaped me, sharp and painful. It's his, isn't it? Sophie didn't answer. She didn't need to. The walls closed in around me. I could hear my pulse in my ears, feel my chest tightening like a vice was crushing me. My vision blurred at the edges. I had lost. Again. Marcus had taken everything from me. My childhood, my confidence, my peace of mind. And now, he had taken my wife. The betrayal was too much. I turned on my heel and walked out the door. Sophie called after me, her voice cracking. Ethan, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. I kept walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't be there anymore. I don't remember how long I walked. The streets blurred together under the glow of flickering streetlights, the cold night air biting at my skin. My mind replayed every moment, every lie, every whispered conversation I hadn't heard but had existed nonetheless. Marcus, Sophie, the two people I had trusted most, conspiring behind my back. The weight of it pressed down on me, an unbearable, crushing force. My hands curled into fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. The rage inside me burned hotter with every step I took, and before I knew it, I was standing outside Marcus's apartment. I had spent my whole life running from him. Maybe it was time to stop. I raised my fist and pounded on the door. Seconds later, it swung open. Marcus stood there, shirtless, a beer in one hand. His smirk faltered for a moment before returning full force. Ethan, he drawled, leaning lazily against the doorframe. Didn't expect to see you here. I saw red. Before I could stop myself, I swung. My fist connected with his jaw, the impact sending a sharp jolt up my arm. He stumbled back, cursing. What the hell? I lunged at him. Years of pent-up anger, betrayal, and pain boiling over all at once. We crashed into his apartment, knocking over a lamp, the sound of shattering glass barely registering in my ears. Marcus fought back, of course. He always did. But this time, I didn't care. I had spent my entire life being his punching bag. Not anymore. Not this time. He landed a blow to my ribs, but I barely felt it. I shoved him against the wall, my breath ragged. You took everything from me. My voice was hoarse, raw with emotion. Marcus wiped blood from the corner of his mouth, grinning despite the split in his lip. Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the wall so hard the picture frames rattled. Dramatic? My voice shook. You slept with my wife. You got her pregnant. He had the audacity to laugh, like this was just another game. Like I was still the same kid he could manipulate and torment. But I wasn't. I let go of him, stepping back. You know what? I said, my chest rising and falling with each ragged breath. I feel sorry for you. Marcus scoffed. Oh, please. No, really? I continued, my voice steady now. You've spent your entire life trying to destroy me. And for what? To prove that you're better? Stronger? Smarter? I shook my head. But look at you. You don't have anything. You're nothing. And you always will be. His smirk faltered. Just for a second. I turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. By the way, I added, glancing over my shoulder, you might want to get a DNA test. Marcus frowned. What? I let out a hollow laugh. You really think Sophie wouldn't cheat on you too? The way his face twisted, rage, doubt, panic, was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. I walked out, leaving him exactly where he belonged, alone. I didn't go home. Home didn't feel like home anymore. Instead, I found myself at a hotel, staring blankly at the ceiling, my mind racing. Sophie had called me 12 times, texted me even more. I didn't answer. I didn't know if I ever would. The next morning, I went back to the apartment, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I needed to pack my things, to leave for good. Sophie was waiting. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She had been crying. Good. Ethan, she whispered, stepping toward me. Please, let's talk. I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. There's nothing to talk about. Her lower lip trembled. I made a mistake. I let out a bitter laugh. A mistake? I gestured around the apartment, the place we had built together, the life she had burned to the ground. You call 6 months of lying a mistake? She flinched. I never wanted to hurt you, and yet, you did. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I stared at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No, Sophie, I said quietly. You won't. I walked past her, heading to the bedroom to grab my suitcase. She didn't try to stop me. She knew it was over. As I left the apartment for the last time, a strange sense of relief washed over me. I had lost everything, but for the first time in my life, I was free. I had always thought that betrayal would be the hardest thing to endure, that nothing could hurt more than realizing the people you loved had been deceiving you all along. I was wrong. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the aftermath, the quiet moments when I was left alone with my thoughts, trying to decide what came next. The war raging inside my head. Should I try to salvage what was left of my marriage, or should I let it burn? I spent the next few days locked in a hotel room, drowning in memories, replaying every conversation, every touch, every moment that now felt like a carefully orchestrated lie. I had loved Sophie, truly, deeply, and yet, love had not been enough. She had called me, texted me, begged me to talk. But what was there to say? There was no apology that could undo what she had done. Then came the final blow, a letter from her lawyer, a form requesting an amicable divorce. She hadn't even tried to fight for us, hadn't tried to prove that what we had was worth saving. And that was when I knew. This wasn't just betrayal, it was abandonment. I signed the papers, but there was one thing left to do before I could truly walk away. I needed answers. I demanded a paternity test. I needed to know, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the child she carried was Marcus's. Sophie hesitated at first, her face twisting with guilt. Ethan, does it really matter? I stared at her, incredulous. Does it matter? I repeated, my voice low, dangerous. You lied to me for 6 months. You carried another man's child while sharing my bed. And you're asking if it matters? She flinched. I just mean, it won't change anything. We're getting divorced anyway. I let out a cold, bitter laugh. It might not change anything for you, but I need to know the truth. She didn't argue after that. A week later, the results came in, 99.9% certainty. The child was Marcus's. I had prepared myself for the answer, had told myself it wouldn't hurt, that I had already lost everything anyway. But reading those words, seeing it in black and white, made me feel like I was drowning all over again. Marcus had taken everything from me, and he wasn't even sorry. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he grinned. You really should have seen this coming, little bro. I clenched my fists. You don't even feel bad, do you? Marcus scoffed. Why would I? Sophie came to me, not the other way around. He leaned back, arms crossed over his chest. Face it, Ethan. You were always too weak to keep what's yours. The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit, but I refused to let him see it. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. I hope you're ready, I said quietly. He frowned. For what? For the fallout. I turned and walked away, leaving him to wonder what that meant. Because I wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. I had spent my whole life letting Marcus win. As kids, he had stolen my peace of mind. As adults, he had stolen my wife. But this time, he wouldn't walk away unscathed. I want to see my parents. It had been years since I willingly stepped foot in their house. The place looked the same, too pristine, too cold, like a museum exhibit rather than a home. My mother greeted me with a tight smile, surprised by my visit but eager to pretend we were still a picture-perfect family. My father barely glanced up from his newspaper. Marcus had always been their favorite. But even they couldn't ignore this. I need to talk to you, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Mom gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing. It's about Marcus, I continued. Her expression softened. Oh, Ethan, if this is about old wounds. No, I cut in. It's about now. About what he's done. I took a deep breath. Marcus had an affair with Sophie. The words hung heavy in the air, sinking into the silence like stones. My father finally looked up. My mother's face twisted into something unreadable. Ethan, she said slowly, like she was carefully choosing her words. Are you sure? I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. I have proof. Messages. A paternity test. I met her eyes, daring her to deny it. She's pregnant. And the baby is his. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Dad exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. That idiot. I should have felt relief, validation, even. But then my mother spoke again. There must be some mistake. I stiffened. What? She shook her head quickly, grasping for straws. Maybe Sophie lied about the dates. Maybe the test was wrong. Ethan, you and Marcus are brothers. Sometimes those things get mixed up. I stared at her in disbelief. Are you seriously defending him? She faltered. He wouldn't do this to you. I let out a bitter laugh. He's been doing things to me my whole life, Mom. And you've let him. She opened her mouth, then closed it. No defense this time. No excuses. For once, even she couldn't justify this. My father sighed, shaking his head. That boy is a disgrace. That boy, not my son, not your brother, just that boy. And I knew, in that moment, that Marcus had finally burned his last bridge. Days later, I got the call. Marcus had gone to see our parents, likely expecting them to smooth things over, to shield him like they always did. But this time, it didn't work. Dad had snapped. He had called Marcus exactly what he was, a selfish, manipulative bastard who didn't deserve the family name. And for the first time in his life, Marcus had faced real consequences. Dad had rewritten his will. Everything, our family's estate, the business shares, the inheritance, was now legally mine. Marcus was cut off. No more financial safety net. No more easy handouts. He had nothing. I should have felt satisfied. But when I saw Marcus standing outside my apartment later that night, drenched in rain, his face a mixture of rage and desperation, I realized something. He hadn't come to apologize. He had come to beg. Ethan, he said, his voice hoarse. Come on, man. You can't just let them do this to me. I stared at him, my chest tight. They didn't do this to you, Marcus. You did. He let out a bitter laugh. You think you're better than me? No, I said simply. Just smarter. He took a step closer, his eyes wild. You don't get it, do you? Without that money, I have nothing. I need you to fix this. I looked at him, the brother who had tormented me, stolen from me, broken me, and felt nothing. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. I stepped back. That's not my problem. And with that, I shut the door, leaving him exactly where he had left me all those years ago, alone. Marcus had always been untouchable. No matter what he did, he always landed on his feet. He had our parents' unconditional support, their wealth as a safety net, and an unshakable belief that he could manipulate his way out of anything. But this time was different. This time, there was no one left to save him. Losing the inheritance meant losing everything. His apartment, his car, his cushy lifestyle, all gone in the blink of an eye. The friends who had once flocked around him disappeared just as fast. Without money, without power, Marcus was just another man scrambling to survive. Then, Sophie left him. It happened barely a month after everything fell apart. She had tolerated his arrogance when he had wealth, but once she realized he couldn't provide for her or the baby, she moved on. Just like that. I knew because I got a message from her. Sophie, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I stared at the text for a long time before locking my phone and tossing it aside. I had nothing to say to her. Not long after, Marcus came to find me. It was late when I heard the knock on my door. Slow. Hesitant. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. When I opened the door, Marcus stood there, drenched from the rain, looking like a ghost of the man he used to be. His eyes were hollow, his clothes disheveled. For the first time in my life, he looked small. We need to talk, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond, but I didn't close the door either. He took it as permission to continue. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. That's not my problem. His jaw clenched. Come on, man. We're brothers. I let out a sharp laugh. Are we? Marcus flinched. He looked down at the ground, swallowing hard. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve your help, but, he exhaled shakily. I have nowhere else to go. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, of seeing Marcus suffer the way he had made me suffer. But now that it was here, I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected, only exhaustion. I sighed. So what exactly are you asking me for? His eyes met mine, desperate. A second chance. The words hung between us, heavy with expectation. Marcus had never asked me for anything before. He had always taken, stolen, manipulated his way into getting what he wanted. But now he was standing in front of me, drenched, broken, stripped of his usual arrogance. And for the first time in my life, he was asking. I stared at him, searching for something, guilt, remorse, a hint of the person he might have been if he hadn't spent his entire life trying to destroy mine. But all I saw was desperation. You think you've paid your price? I asked quietly. Marcus swallowed hard. I lost everything. His voice cracked. Isn't that enough? I shook my head, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. No, Marcus. Losing something you never deserved in the first place isn't punishment. It's justice. He blinked, as if he hadn't expected that. As if he truly believed that the universe had been unfair to him. I exhaled slowly. You had everything. Parents who adored you. Opportunities handed to you on a silver platter. And instead of appreciating any of it, you spent your entire life making sure I had nothing. Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides. I was a kid, he muttered. I didn't know any better. I scoffed. And when you slept with my wife? When you laughed in my face about it? Were you just a kid then, too? He flinched, looking away. I screwed up, all right. I get it. No, Marcus. You don't. The silence stretched between us. The rain poured harder, soaking through his clothes. He shivered, but didn't move. I could have invited him in. Could have given him a blanket, let him stay the night. But I didn't, because this was the end of our story. You've spent your whole life taking from me, I said, my voice steady. But you can't take from me anymore. Not my peace. Not my dignity. Not my future. I stepped back, gripping the edge of the door. You made your choices. Now live with them. His eyes widened, panic creeping in. Ethan, I closed the door, and just like that, Marcus was gone from my life. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. The past no longer had its claws in me. Sophie was gone. Marcus was gone. And for the first time, I wasn't running from my past. I was walking toward my future. A new country. A fresh start. A life that was finally, truly mine. And I never looked back. Now, I'm going to read some of the top comments from this story for you. Loyalty matters. Man, the fact that Marcus had the audacity to ask for help after all he did is insane. Some people never change. Narrator, exactly. Marcus spent his entire life taking from others, and even at the very end, he still thought Ethan would save him. Unbelievable. Forgive but never forget. I wonder, if Marcus had truly apologized, would Ethan have forgiven him? Or was it already too late? Narrator, that's a great question. If Marcus had shown real remorse, would Ethan have given him another chance? What do you guys think? Justice served $9.99. Ethan played it perfectly. He didn't need revenge. He just let karma do its thing. Absolute respect. Narrator, that's right. Sometimes, you don't need to strike back. Just let people suffer the consequences of their own actions. Not my brother anymore. I gotta admit, closing the door on Marcus must have been one of the most satisfying moments ever. Literal chills. Narrator, exactly. That moment was the ultimate mic drop. Time for Ethan to move on and let the past stay in the past. What about you? If you were Ethan, would you have shut the door on Marcus? Or would you have helped him? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Reddit True Vault for more incredible stories. Top of form, bottom of form.